Hey guys, all right, this is part two, taking just really small steps into working up into something bigger. But I want to go over the parables in John in comparison to the other gospels. There aren't any. There are no parables in John. He employs a what you would call the misunderstood statement technique. It's a literary device apparently, and it's to say something almost to purposely misunderstood. But in a writing context, it's usually done to illustrate the writer's points. But the Jesus of the synoptics speaks in parables and what they call pithy sayings. And what you have in John is what's called the essay style. He speaks in these very long, drawn out answers. And if you read the words carefully, it's a different type of speech altogether between the synoptics and John. Just the way he talks is differently. And I'll start getting into individual things more often in these other videos, but what I'm saying is you read the statements in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and there's some variation in them, and there are some stories that aren't included. Like I said, the whole thing about John is not about any one singular point proving my case. It's the collection of everything that seems to point in this direction. And the Jesus you have speaking in John is it's a good time to actually bring up a saying, because it popped into my mind when I first thought about this. David McMurdo made a video, and one of his statements in the video was that Jesus speaks in parables, not in riddles. Well, in John, he speaks in riddles. They're flat out riddles. And I'll be getting to the I am statements and, all this other stuff. But the language construction, the way someone speaks in John, the Jesus in John, does not even speak in the same way that he speaks in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The one in Matthew, Mark, and Luke sounds a lot like, if you read the Midrash, he sounds a lot like a rabbi, like a classical rabbi. And, how shall we liken it? Or how should we consider? Or what do we compare it to? Things like that. Those were very rabbinic ways of speaking. The Jesus in John is a very I-oriented character, very centered on himself. And, we do have to raise the honest literary question. If we both had a college professor and three of us wrote a book about it, and then someone else wrote a book that didn't sound anything like him, we would raise questions about that. We would say, this is not how this guy spoke. He's a mystic in John. He's very kingdom oriented in the other gospels, and very I oriented in the Gospel of John. The bottom line is, it was like when I was watching the debate between Ehrman and, what was the guy's name? I think it might have been Wilson, but I remember they went back and forth and they duking it out. And then Ehrman asked him, after they dance around the bush a couple of times, Ehrman asked him a very direct question. He says, "You don't mean to tell me that you think Jesus said the things that he says in John, do you?" And this evangelical said no. It kind of threw me off when I first saw that debate. It's like, what is this guy talking about? And when you really start to look at it, that seems to be the consensus among scholarship outside of evangelical lanes. And most evangelical scholars, I won't say most, I'd say there's a percentage of them. It may be half, it may be less, but they will honestly just admit that Jesus didn't speak this way. He just didn't speak like this. And the reason it was written this way is to convey points. In other words, they were using Jesus in a literary manner, and in their mind as evangelical, they were using him in a Christian manner to convey these points, even though they weren't things that he actually said. You can't have Jesus run around saying "I am" and not have that in the other gospels. It's just the fact of the matter. It's highly problematic. And there are no parables, so what did and some of these accounts are supposed to be around the same stories, the same time periods, and like I said, I'm gonna keep going. I just want to stay kind of focused on the parables, but he doesn't even teach the same way in John, the way he teaches with the others. And I got a chart actually. It's pretty interesting. Just something so you have some word facts. And I'm pretty sure this is correct. I looked into several parts of it, but here, this gives you an example of some of the differences in the context between the synoptics and between John. The word life is used in Matthew 7 times. It's used 4 times in Mark, 5 times in Luke. It's used 36 times in John. The word kingdom is used 55 times in Matthew, 20 times in Mark, 46 times in Luke, and only 5 times in John. So when you look at the two references of life and kingdom, Matthew comes in at 62, Mark comes in at 24, and Luke comes in at 51, and John comes in at 41. And the interesting thing is, if you take all of Paul's letters, you have it 37 times, life. You have Acts, it's life 8 times, 2 in Hebrews, 2 in James, 4 in Peter, 13 in John's letters combined, 1, 2, and 3, 2 in Jude, and 23 in Revelation. And then you see those numbers in comparison with John, they dwarf in comparison. Life is used more than kingdom. Kingdom is used more than life throughout the Bible, but it's just a little interesting syntactical study is the difference between the language life and kingdom. The kingdom was anybody reads the Bible knows that the kingdom was the focus in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and eternal life becomes the focus in John. But the odd thing is it's supposed to be covering the same amount of time and talking to the same people in the same story. And I definitely won't get into any drawn out debates over it, but I just don't believe the things that John says he said. It's not the same guy that you find in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And even if you pose a hypothetical Q document, and they also have a hybrid of a Luke Markan document, even with those documents, you don't have that kind of language coming out of Jesus's mouth. And in writing, just like they can detect these books with other people, that they can tell that someone else wrote a book, even if it's in Greek, because it's in the style of the words that you use, the vocabulary. It's the same thing with speaking. You can tell by the oration who the person is. And one Jesus, like I said, he sounds like a philonic mystic, and the other Jesus sound just like a rabbi. They sound like somebody that could be quoting the Midrash. So that's that. That's the comparison of the parables between John and the other Gospels. There are no parables in John. None. Apparently, he had a totally different teaching technique when he wasn't around. I don't know. I couldn't even tell you. So that's the parables and some of the word usage in John. God bless.